Good morning. Welcome to the Rangers Review morning briefing. It is Monday. Myself and Jonny McFarlane here to talk through another busy weekend in the world of Jonny Rangers. We're going to talk about Steven Gerrard, a little bit more perhaps context as to why that did not happen, the questions that are continuing to rise about that, Jonny, and also where Rangers go from now. The news on Saturday night that Gerrard would not be the next Rangers manager, and that manager distinction is important, puts attention on to who will be the next head coach. We wrote yesterday that Danny Rohl had impressed. We're going to get a little bit more into the German coach, most recently of Sheffield Wednesday, and talk around some of the implications of this week because they're back in action very soon. Jonny, firstly, I think you were in Italy this weekend, weren't you? So you've probably had a nicer weekend than me, certainly away from your laptop screen more. Are you well?
I am well, although my wife wasn't too well at 9:30 on a Saturday night in Italy when I said, sorry, my dear, this night is over. Off you go. I'm going away to do some stuff here. I need to go and have a look at this. But apart from that, it was really good. Great to get away, and lovely part of the world is Sorrento and the Amalfi Coast and all that. So had my feet up, had a few limoncello spritzes on the go. And then the bombshell hit, obviously, on Saturday night that it wasn't actually happening. Interestingly enough, Josh, I think we'd all kind of started to feel a little bit concerned by the direction of travel. I know you guys had some information on Friday night, but by Saturday morning, I'd sent out a few messages just wondering why it was taking so long and wondering what the situation was, because it kind of felt like it was taking a little bit longer than certainly some of the reporting suggested it would. And then come Saturday night, obviously, the news broke that Steven Gerrard had stepped away, which leaves Rangers with an almighty cluster beep to deal with. And we're seeing the fallout for it now. If the fans weren't happy before and they were unhappy about the whole Russell Martin debacle rightly, then, geez, a level of toxicity online of which I don't think I've ever seen, which is remarkable given for the last 4 years where Rangers have placed themselves. And everyone was getting it, weren't they? Absolutely everyone was getting it. And I as an observer, I would be slightly concerned in the position that the club are in right now. I think it is a crisis position because you have this serious disconnect between the fans and the club. It's a new ownership who's only been in the door 4 or 5 months. And this next decision they make, I can't explain how pivotal it is, Josh. They need to turn it around, and they need to turn it around quickly. And whoever they hire has to be someone capable of taking on the mantle of the Rangers manager or head coach. And for me, it doesn't look like they've got someone lined up that is of a standard that I think the Rangers fans would feel as comfortable as they did about Steven Gerrard.
Yeah. And I think what this summer shows, and we're going to get into that topic more, but I think what this summer shows is that does matter, because one of the difficulties that Russell Martin had was he was up against it from the off. And perhaps, we've used this analogy a lot before, if the decision-making before was too emotional, I think this decision lacked emotion, not because, or maybe lacked the context of emotion. And what I mean by that is it should have been recognised that if things did not go brilliantly, it was going to be very, very difficult. And the atmosphere, Max Aaron said it recently, didn't he? The atmosphere from the stands falls onto the park. Trying to play a certain way in in front of an impatient crowd is difficult. And Gerrard felt like the unifying candidate, if we were to make this political. Listen, we had some details out yesterday, Jonny, on exactly why and our understanding this broke down. I think the important thing to stress is there's two sides to this story. Source from Rangers was insistent that, look, this isn't the end of this. He could come back at another point. The door was not closed by either sides on this relationship, and also was keen to point out that Gerrard has worked with a sporting director before. However, you weren't 2 days talks in kind of catching up and chewing the fat and asking one another how the families were. This was a trying to make a deal happen. A deal could not happen in the end. An important distinction, I think, to make is that Gerrard isn't he's a collaborative worker, and you see that with his management team. You see that with the fact that he worked with Mark Allen and Ross Wilson very successfully. Ross Wilson went to Newcastle for the weekend, didn't he? Where he'll be working with Eddie Howe. But the club was built in Gerrard's image. I think it's fair to say he was the spokesman over those 3.5 years. He was the biggest voice, and Rangers have moved away from that in the summer. They've went to a head coach format. I think there is good sense in trying to do that, even if I think that getting Gerrard back at this moment in time sort of had to be the priority. He's maybe worked with sporting directors before, Jonny, but he's probably not worked in that type of structure where he's just a piece of it, where he deals with coaching the team and not sort of managing the club. And that's probably an important distinction to make, isn't it? Because a point I reiterated there, these talks weren't 2 days old, 2.5 days old by the time that news broke on Saturday night, just to kind of teeter around the edges of a deal. There was real appetite to make this happen ultimately because of where Rangers stood and because of where Gerrard stood, as we are led to believe quite specifically on structure. That deal couldn't be done, couldn't materialise in the end.
Yeah, and you can understand why Steven Gerrard feels that way, because he's built a structure previously at Rangers that was almost placing him in I would almost describe it as a more public-facing director of football role, because we know that Michael Beale mostly took the training, mostly devised the training, and was the guy that was leading the training ground almost. Steven Gerrard was there, Steven Gerrard was watching, but he was almost one of these managers that kind of took themselves out from it a little bit, so he could really assess what was going on in a calm, cool, sort of detached way. And all those people he built up around him, and he's talked about this himself many times, were designed to bring the best out of him. They were designed to fill in the blank spaces where he had weaknesses. So I suppose in the current structure that Rangers have, Steven Gerrard might look at it and say, well, quite a lot of what I was doing previously and what made me successful as a Rangers manager in the past is now gone. It's no longer under my remit. So that doesn't really work. And certainly one of the things that Steven Gerrard got bang on, I would say probably 75 to 80% of the time, was recruitment. If you look at players like Borna Barisic, like Connor Goldson, like Glenn Kemar, Stephen Davis and Alan McGregor are no-brainers, but he still managed to sign off on the no-brainers and get them in. Ryan Kent. These are all guys that drove that team to not only a 55th title, but a Europa League final the following season. So I think Steven Gerrard would look at handing over recruitment, say, to a more structured club-orientated model and say, hold on a minute, this is not right, this is not for me. And I think that would almost certainly be part of the problem here. I mean, we are led to believe that there was a significant road that had been travelled down on this. There's no doubt about it. I mean, this looked like it was going ahead to all intents and purposes. Contacts were telling us at the Rangers Review that this was the most likely option. And there's no doubt in my mind that Steven Gerrard is not travelling, as you've already said, Joshua, from Barrie into London for talks that last 2 days, unless there's significant interest on his part. And that's the important thing. Listen, there's been a bit of conjecture about Gerrard the last time, and you mentioned this, and I think this is worth mentioning again. It's our understanding that the previous talks in the summer were short. It was a how you doing? What do you want to do? What's the situation? What's the scenario? It wasn't the kind of circus that we've had in the last week.
It was an inquiry. It was an inquiry, Jonny. It wasn't something that got far.
Exactly. This was much, much more detailed. This was much more tangible. And the fact that it has fallen through, I think, much more damaging.
Yeah. And again, that's an important distinction you make, that we can get quite tied up, I think, on flow charts and who's in charge of what and who actually signs the players. And at the end of the day, normally a lot of people are making decisions about a player being signed for a club, because if any business is going to make a big investment, you probably consult quite a lot of opinions and make a decision collaboratively. However, if you put a bunch of voices into a room and Steven Gerrard is one of them, he's going to be the biggest, and he's not going to be he's not a head coach. And we wrote that last week, that was one of the topics that was most pertinent for discussion. How exactly would that work? We'll get to some comments, Jonny, because I also want to move the conversation on as well.
Just one thing, Josh.
Yes,
I just want to add this. I can't help but feeling that this has been an enormous failure and missed opportunity on the part of the new owners. This should have all been done. This due diligence should have been done weeks ago. Russell Martin has been on the verge of the sack for some time. And the basic due diligence of what it would take to get Steven Gerrard, if they thought Steven Gerrard was the right candidate, could have easily been done outside of the public glare via Zoom meetings and all those functions that are now available to us. Mm-hmm. And it's remarkable to me that they would basically waste a week on that and go down the route where it's so far down the line and then decide that it wasn't going to work. I mean, that's to me is just a catastrophic failure. And a big part of that is, well, Rangers have this structure. Like, to me, that should have been the first part of the discussions, not the last part.
Yeah.
That this structure is, if it's not going to change, then it just automatically cuts out the possibility of Steven Gerrard being the manager. So why even get the fans' hopes up and create this sort of maelstrom of noise and conjecture that followed? And that is I think what the management team are now paying the price for, and they are now going to feel the heat when it comes to getting the right man. Because this Dundee United game is coming thick and fast, Josh.
I know.
We're on Monday.
But also, you know, Chris and I were discussing this on Saturday night. You have at the moment, Rangers' league campaign is still, it's sort of very on the brink, but it's still within distance, right? What, Hearts are 11 points ahead, Celtic are 9 or 10. If you drop points in one more game in the league, it's done probably. And if you drop points in one more game in Europe, it's done probably. And suddenly that role becomes a little bit less appealing for a new man coming in, because they're not just up against it, but properly up against it, as they would be if those two results were to unfold. Now, Rangers could also go and win those games, but on the basis of this season, that seems less likely than the opposite at the moment.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I completely agree.
We'll move on to talk a little bit about Danny Rohl then, because he is the name that has been doing the rounds most since we wrote yesterday that he had impressed. That is the fatal words that I think a lot of people don't want to hear. Impressed in interviews. Aaron saying Russell Martin impressed them also. Joshua, Rob isn't having it. He says he's very underwhelmed with Danny Rohl. Another comment here saying too many had their hearts on Gerrard, will now be dead against anyone else. Think it's been a mad overreaction to Rohl. Another comment here saying Danny Rohl had impressed, but Russell Martin was the outstanding candidate. How are we supposed to trust the process when the people implementing said process got the last appointment so badly wrong? And a comment here from Chris Dykes, who kindly donates to the channel as well. All the negativity around Steven Gerrard not coming back is draining. He says the board acknowledged the mistake of Russell Martin, so give them a chance to fix it. Gerrard would have been my first choice, but we have to move on quickly. Rohl was still under contract at Sheffield Wednesday in the summer. That's probably an important distinction to make as well. As everyone who follows football will know, it was a complicated situation for him at Hillsborough. He'd signed a contract, I think a 3-year contract the year before after keeping them up. Rangers insist that he's not the only candidate. They insist that there is not a leading candidate. As you say, Jonny, at this moment in time, they have not got long at all, because Stevie Smith has taken training alongside Brian Gilmore, and Rhys Owen and Sal Bibble have both remained from Russell Martin's staff. But Stevie Smith was taking the under-19s at the weekend. The first team squad were off. A lot of them are still away on international duty and won't return to the end of the week. but crucially, Rangers have not, and understand this to be an intentional, have not announced a formal interim team at the moment, as they did after the sacking of Michael Beale and as they did after the sacking of Philippe Clement, which speaks to your point about time frame. Just firstly on Danny Rohl, as I say, the official line at the moment is multiple talks with multiple candidates. Other names that have been mentioned is the likes of Michael Carrick as well. Do you think, and I'll tee up by raising this comment because I know it's something you've spoken a lot about. The head coach role is massively concerning for me. We need a leader. Do you agree with Chris's point there that the board need a chance to acknowledge their mistake? Can that exist at the same time as, but if you're doing the same thing, is that an acknowledgement? And I appreciate it's difficult because if they were being reactive and just going to a manager and saying you sort everything, then I think that's grasping around in the dark more than trying to go to the next best guy, so to speak. But can you understand supporter reservation about it and your kind of overall feeling on Danny Rohl?
Of course I can understand supporter reservation of it. You just have to look at Danny Rohl's CV. Look, he's got a great coaching pedigree. There's no doubt about that. If you look at his time at Leipzig, at Bayern Munich, these are elite clubs, and he's been dealing with elite coaches. But his managerial CV reads, saved Sheffield Wednesday from relegation and came mid-table in the Championship. That is in no way a CV that's going to lead you to the Rangers manager job and at any time in the past, certainly. And it shouldn't be something that should be there now unless the board felt that this really is a manager on the up, a manager going places, a manager capable of relighting the fire under this club. But the problem is the board have lost any credibility with the fans on the back of the Russell Martin debacle.
Yeah.
So Rohl might be brilliant, Josh, and certainly we're all reading about what Sheffield Wednesday fans are saying about the context around his performance as manager, about the poor tools that he had, and he came in and played against what would be his normal philosophy, as it were, played a direct brand of football to keep them up because he thought it was the best way to perform in the Championship, managed to keep them up with a game to go. And then in the second season started something that was a little bit more progressive, but still it was part of an evolution. And certainly the players, listening to Barrie Bannon, the players talk very, very positively about him. But all that said, I think going from Russell Martin to Danny Rohl, it puts this management group under so much pressure if this doesn't go right. Because assuming that it is Danny Rohl, because as we discussed, time is ticking on, and listen, it might not be, but that would be my assumption at the moment. If it is Danny Rohl, then I think he's going to be under huge pressure. 36-year-old guy, I just think that is going to be a mistake. Now, I said before on X, I've been open about this, honest about it from the start. I think Rangers needed to open up and acknowledge that they've made a mistake with this head coach model. I think you can have a progressive football model that doesn't have to be so extreme. And I think they should have gone for someone who, as you've already said on here a couple of times, would be more of a halfway house, who's worked under this kind of situation in the past, who's performed and knows the league and knows the club. I think you need someone like that. There was 3 very good candidates out there who fit that criteria, Josh. The first one, Steven Gerrard, has said, no, he'd have been my first choice. The second one is Derek McInnes. We don't know if he would leave Hearts. People saying, why would he leave that club at the moment, given what they've got going? Well, there's hundreds of thousands of reasons, because Hearts' salary, I'm led to believe, is about £300,000 a year. The Rangers' salary, I think, can go up to about £1.5 million a year. So there would be enormous incentive for Derek McInnes to leave. But he's already shown that he's not just driven by money, because he certainly would have got paid a lot more when he was offered the job by Dave King and then refused it to stay at Aberdeen. So I think that is also a really fraught, difficult one to pull off. And I suspect that Hearts would make it extraordinarily difficult. So another circus beckons, but that would be where I would go next. And then third choice, slightly difficult because he's still in the middle of a title race himself and wouldn't be available, I don't think, until November. But Kevin Muscat, for me, progressive football, very attacking, won leagues in 3 different countries, has been a Rangers player, speaks English, obviously, because he's Australian, and I think would bring in a knowledge of other leagues that would allow the recruitment team to tap into his contact book and potentially get players in the way that Ange Postecoglou did for Celtic. He'd be my third choice because I do think that is a gamble based on the fact that his one sojourn as a manager into Europe was in Belgium. No one talks about that. Wasn't successful at all. Left with his tail between his legs. But I do like Kevin Muscat as a leader. He looks like a leader. He talks like a leader. And he's certainly a progressive, modern coach in the style of football that his teams play. So
yeah,
that would be how I would go. I don't think the club are seeing it the way I see it. As far as we know, Derek McInnes certainly hasn't been approached. Hearts haven't been approached. And Kevin Muscat remains someone that they haven't looked at or spoken to.
Yeah, and as you say, he's kind of in the tail end of a title race. The thing with Danny Rohl is that I did an interview with Kemar Roofe last week, which was interesting for a number of reasons. But one of the most interesting for me was he has basically seen Rangers from the rise and fall of their title win, right? He came in under Gerrard and he's worked under 4 different managers. So he's worked under Van Bronckhorst, Gerrard, Beale and Clement. And what he said, and he's an intelligent guy, articulate. People can watch the interview if they've not done so already. But he was quite animated when I asked him, well, what do the club need to succeed? And he kind of did go along the lines of, you need it because it's so big, because it's so intense. You need it is the pressure, and I'm quoting him directly, it's the pressure that gets to managers. And he's speaking there about being in the midst of this for the last few years, from 2020 to 2024. And what he said about Gerrard is he's a figurehead, and he spoke about the atmosphere that was created in the training ground that title-winning season, in part because of Gerrard's ability to still be a kind of humble enough that humble, but with an ego too, so that he can take on his shoulders the demands of this role. My worry would be that because it feels like a bit of a poison chalice at the moment, whoever comes in with whatever footballing ideas, can you get them off the ground? Now, Rohl, I think, is more pragmatic, and we can maybe speak again a little bit about that distinction between Russell Martin's style of football and his style of football, Jonny. But he isn't a club figurehead. And my question again would be, well, where is the figurehead? Because I don't think Patrick Stewart has been that since he came in. We don't have a habit of sporting directors in Britain speaking to the media loads. They'll maybe do like a club TV interview every 6 months, once a year. But that would be my concern. And I probably wouldn't have said that in the summer, but I think you've got to look at the context of where Rangers are and how they get out of this situation. And that would probably be my concern. But on his football, Danny Rohl, he is more pragmatic. He has had a very good coaching career. Again, the argument is, well, how does that translate? Can you get things going up here? To what extent do you place some emphasis on his time at Sheffield Wednesday? Because that is a big club. It's not Rangers level of club. But he was really up against it there. And if you look at what he did, especially in that second season, so he's a bit more pragmatic and he keeps them up. At the second season, he changes things and he has them within 3 points of the playoff in the January window, and then effectively isn't really backed by an owner who I think Sheffield Wednesday fans understandably have a lot of issues with. Could that sort of prepare him for life at Rangers, John, or is it just a completely different kettle of fish still?
I think it's a different kettle of fish, but I know the point that you're trying to make. I do think Rohl would have been a much better appointment than Russell Martin. And I don't think anyone was looking at Russell Martin and thinking that it could work in any way. Whereas, well, actually, I take that back. There were some people that thought it could work. But the majority felt that Russell Martin wasn't going to be a success at Rangers. I think if you had Danny Rohl as a kind of as someone who was going in the summer as a change agent for this new regime, it would have been much more palatable based on all the things you outlined. The trouble was as you say, there's this element of the £4 million that would have had to been paid to get him out of Sheffield Wednesday at that time. And we know that the owner of Sheffield Wednesday is difficult to deal with. But it's very, very difficult to sit here and try and justify the appointment, Josh, because simply put, the fact that someone from the Championship who's only got 2 seasons experience and its highest finish was 12th, it's really, really difficult to sell that to the fans. And I'm not going to try, because you end up being tarred with a brush that the same brush as the board, and people are right to be critical of it. They're right to say this is not the Rangers that we know, that we watched for the last 50 years, in case of people who have been coming to the stadium for a long, long time. This is something different, and I know that they're going for a different type of model, and I know they're looking for a different profile because they've changed it from manager to head coach. But having gone through such a turbulent and catastrophic spell, I think there needed to be an acknowledgement from within that perhaps the idea had been wrong.
Yeah.
Now, perhaps Danny Rohl is more of a halfway house. I think he clearly is more of a halfway house. His style is not a philosophy manager. I tend to think that German football is quite in tune with the DNA of Rangers, just generally. The rock and roll style, the up and at 'em, big physical guys. I think that is playing in much more to the Rangers culture than Russell Martin's tippy-tappy proto Barcelona 2008.
Yes,
I don't even know what you would
I take
want to
your
call
point.
it. The horseshoe thing.
Can I pull you up in a bit of a not pull you up? Can I inquire? So
Yes,
you're totally right that Russell Martin did not work, and one of the biggest reasons he did not work was because one of the worst insults I think in football is the whole Poundland. Well, inaccurate I think is the whole Poundland Pep, and the reason is because all these top managers change all the time. Again, we've made this point before, so apologies if it's repetition, but Guardiola didn't have the likes of Donnarumma and Haaland at either end of the pitch a few years ago when he was winning leagues. So you transition, you change. We saw him go massively defensive against Arsenal for the first time basically ever in his career. Whereas I think the downfall of a coach like Martin at Rangers was until it got too late, he was so dogmatic, and that's what causes the nadir of Bruges. So there was like no scale to it. It was, we're going all in from the start. 2 months, we're going to completely transition this football club. It doesn't matter really what the fans think and how they're going to react to this style of play. It doesn't matter that we have all these must-win games while we're transitioning the squad. We're going to go all. So the point I'm trying to make is you couldn't really have known that before, and I think that was naive. So if you're looking at it from the outside, clearly he did have some ability. He did have a breaking point where he thought, no, I need to alter this, and that was in Bruges. And after Rangers go to a bit more of a I don't even know if let's call it less dogmatic, where they don't play with one number 6, they play with Conor Barr and they go forward a little bit more quickly. And listen, it doesn't work, but it made them more defensively secure for that Old Firm game.
yeah.
So the point I'm trying to make is the theory is great, but especially at a club like this, when the emotion is so heavily charged, the theory has only so much value. It's how does it play out? How do the fans react to it? What is the atmosphere like? And that's I think the point I'm putting to you is the football conversation with Danny Rohl is really important, but perhaps now more than ever, what this has shown is the figurehead element of Rangers is vitally important, because yes, a lot of the criticism was directed towards Russell Martin's football, but it was also because he was unpopular from the start, and that made it very difficult for any momentum to be built. I don't know if I make that point adequately, but that would be my learning from the summer. Yes, all these things matter a lot about the style and the tactical identity in it, but you need to get people moving with you, and you need almost I would say like a salesman who can say what the fans think to a degree, say what the players think, and give them a bit of a direction.
I think that there's always an issue, and we discussed this in the summer privately. I can't remember if we did it on the show or not. Like if Russell Martin fails, the biggest problem would be if Rangers went in the opposite direction and went for a Sean Dyche, because that really would show you that, dispassionately, that would show you that they're all over the place. And so I think there's something to be said about appointing Danny Rohl or someone like that as being a continuation, even though I would say that they're continuing on the wrong path. At least it makes sense on a point of continuum for the strategy, and then they are accountable for that strategy. But I just don't ever believe that it's the right overall strategy for this club, that it's the right way forward when you can have people who could come in who get the idiosyncrasies and who get them immediately, and who could come in and be able to understand that, yeah, Lawrence Shankland is not going to be a player that's going to go down to the Championship and perform, and certainly not the Premier League. But in Scotland, he's a very, very good player because of his the set patterns of play that he does and the set things that he's qualities in, just like Chris Boyd, exactly the same, and I look at someone like Derek McInnes and just think he would take over this squad. He would know how to buff it up to make it better and improve it for Scottish football, and that to me is the answer. And I'm not talking about getting rid of the structure that's in place. Now, there's major questions on over Thelwell right at the moment, but one of the problems that I think Rangers have had is Thelwell's been too prominent in all of this. Why is, a director of football needs to be a 5-year appointment, and the Rangers should have learned the lesson of Ross Wilson. Ross Wilson's was there on every signing. Yes, we're delighted to have him. We think he's going to add this. We think he's going to add that. And ultimately, the fans started to blame Ross Wilson when things went wrong. And fair enough, Ross Wilson had been around for 4 years at that time, so they'd managed it well over that period. I think that's a reasonable period of time for a sporting director to be in place. But that's why I thought John Bennett called it right when he appointed a head of recruitment, somebody that was a sort of public-facing head of recruitment who was accountable for the recruitment. And then you don't have to basically, hold a director of football to account and sack him because the recruitment element hasn't worked. When there might be a million things that he was doing behind the scenes that were very good, that are the rest of his job. People think recruitment is the director of football's job. There's much, much, much more to it than that. And I think like Ross Wilson's a good example. Someone behind the scenes transformed a lot of what Rangers did and modernised a lot of what they did. But ultimately came unstuck because of the recruitment levels, especially in the season after the Europa League run, when a lot of money was spent on players like Yilmaz and Lawrence, in terms of wages for Tom Lawrence, Ben Davies, guys that just didn't go on to be successful Rangers players, and didn't. Rabbi Matondo being another one who we've barely seen in the last year. People had injury problems and didn't contribute a lot, and that was what ultimately led to his departure. And you've seen what he's gone on to do, working at Nottingham Forest in a very successful capacity, and then going up to Newcastle now, and what is one of the really, really good jobs in English football at one of the big clubs in English football, with unlimited funds, basically, when they can get away with it through PSR. So I think that Rangers have made a backward step in that regard, and they have clearly not understood the lessons that should have been learned previously, and that's part of the problem.
Yeah, and I think just to round up that part of the conversation, because I want to talk a bit about the style of football and the Red Bull debate that I know existed inside the building in the summer. But just to round that up, the point is that I think you're saying, and what I agree with you on, whether you like it or not, and whether you try and build a modern structure, which I think Rangers need to do. And part of the reason that they're in this situation after Gerrard left 4 years ago is so much did orientate around him, and it's been a bit of catch-up ever since to try and re-establish that. But the club demands a figurehead. And ultimately, unless you have a very vocal chairman who's here and is at most games and speaks regularly, or a very vocal CEO who does the same, that is going to fall on the manager / head coach, who will always be called the manager. And that is an important distinction to make that you cannot get away from. On that topic of the German style of play, I'm led to believe that this was something that was talked about often in the building in the summer. Clement had spoken a lot about transitions and verticality, and I think Rangers were a bit burned by that because domestically his football became so unstuck, and I can't be revisionist about that. Rangers finished with 77 points. It was their lowest tally since Gerrard came to the club in 2018. However, as you say, the slow possession style of football, Jonny, especially in Europe, I remember the Club Brugge game at home where the crowd were just willing Rangers to go forward, even against Genk when it was 10 men. They were wanting to get behind something and create a bit of a siege mentality, but it was so difficult to do because the football, it was so slow. And my theory on that was, unlike someone like Postecoglou, who I think if you broke his football down to one word, it would be probably something like attack. Whereas I think if you broke Russell Martin's style down to one word, it would be something like control. And you saw that play out, and the crowd didn't relate to it. They didn't respond to it. Danny Rohl's football would be quicker. It would be more direct. It would turn defences. The hope is that you maybe have a bit of a halfway house where you have a really well-coached team, but you also have someone who isn't afraid of the football and doesn't want to get it forward automatically all the time, which is, I think, what Clement fell into. And then you have the other dynamic of Rangers still have to break teams down, and they still have to be comfortable when they're controlling the ball. But I think football's moved on a bit from when Gerrard first came in that the number of packed defences they face week in, week out in Scotland. Don't get me wrong, it's still there sometimes, but look at how Livingston played against Rangers a few weeks ago. Their defensive line was on the halfway line. More and more teams are, I think, trying to be more front foot in how they defend. But could it work at a club like Rangers? And would it, if it's a better cultural fit, would people accept the breakdowns early on a little bit more because it is more amenable to them what's trying to be achieved overall?
I've watched a couple of interviews with Danny Rohl, and I have to say, Josh, I don't think it will be a good cultural fit. He'd have to be a truly exceptional coach, who gets fantastic results for it to work. Because ultimately, I just think the culture of this club is that there's a leader at the head of it. And again, that is why the Gerrard thing made so much sense to me. You have a guy who, he isn't the coach, he's the figurehead. He's the guy who is leading this huge institution. And under him, you have the coaches that are managing the players and managing the style of play, and under Gerrard's leadership and direction, but they are the experts in their field. I think Gerrard once said that he would have to spend 25 years coaching to be as good a coach as Michael Beale, 25 years that he spent playing. And it, as he said again in that interview with Rio Ferdinand, he has to get that really, really important framework right around him. And I think with Tom Colshaw, who's his buddy, isn't he? He's the guy he can bounce ideas of. Is the guy he's closest to. They're like a wee sort of partnership. Who was also very good at the set pieces, by the way. You got McAllister, who's a really positive, bubbly guy who's played at the really, really top level, who's won things at the top level, who understands Rangers, understands Scottish football there. And then you had Michael Beale, who was was a progressive, modern coach who was brilliant on the grass, who all the players were raving about in terms of his coaching ability. And that sort of setup, that was what made Gerrard great. It wasn't Gerrard. It was all those elements. Now, can Rangers replicate that? Can they look at that and say, is there some way that it can be recreated? I don't know. I think more pain may be ahead, because I suspect that it's a very, very, very difficult set of decisions that have to be made, and there isn't an awful lot of time to make them. And when that's the case, Josh, mistakes are made. And I would not like to be the one that's in the kind of with the final decision maker in this scenario, because there's no real good options that I can see that will do the most important thing for this club, which is unite the fans and the club back together. And again, is Danny Rohl going to do that? Some people say, well, he'll do that by winning games.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we shall see. It's going to be an intriguing week. We'll, of course, be right across it, keeping you up to date. A lot of contrasting views in the comments. James says, go for Lampard. He's top of the Championship at the moment. Second in the Championship is Rob Edwards, who was spoken to about the role in the summer. YouTube member Bruno Sparky, I'm warming to the idea of an SPFL manager, Stephen Robinson or Derek McInnes. Yeah, talks ongoing for Rangers to fill that vacant head coach role at Ibrox. We will keep you up to date as and when we can on what is unfolding. A quick word for our podcast sponsors, Willow's Fencing, just before we close. The Glasgow-based fencing company you can trust. There is a 10% off code in the description if you're looking to get some work done. No job is too big or small. Head over to willowsfencing.com for all the details, and please subscribe on YouTube as well to support the work that we do. We will be back right throughout the week bringing you all the latest Rangers news. Enjoy your Monday, and we'll speak to you soon. Bye for now.